My name is Corey Hood. It is the 17th of August, 2020. It's a Monday, and this recording is for Professor Yi Lee of my Philosophy 101 class with the attached numbers 01OL1451. This is my presentation, the attached assignment to my final paper, the thesis of which revolves around disillusionment and whether or not we should buy into it. For me, there are two primary kinds of ideas. There are the ideas that we can prove on the plane that we care most about, scientific ideas. I whack an apple tree, an apple has this percentage chance of falling. Or I drop an apple's going to hit the ground because what comes up must come down. Gravity is a law. And there are ideas that require more reach. The ones that you can't necessarily visualize, but you probably can't disprove either. Ideas like Plato's allegory of the cave and Descartes' I think, therefore I am. And the small hole in that statement is that you can prove Plato's allegory of the cave. It's proven. The reality that we perceive is not the whole and total reality. There are more than three dimensions. And the senses that we perceive things with, we don't have access to the greatest extent of those either. We can only perceive so many waves of light, so many flavors, so many sounds, so many scents. And we can only rely on those to a certain extent. I mean, look at bats. They can echolocate across a whole field. If you asked a human to echolocate and they could actually succeed in doing it, you would slap their face on the front of a comic book. That's why I chose Plato versus Descartes. Because the ideas are different, but they come down to the same thing. You can't trust what you're looking at. But my response to that is I should trust what I'm looking at, because it's bad not to. The fundamental thing when thinking about that second type of ideas, for me, always, is whether or not I should believe in them. Whether or not that belief will have a visual impact on the reality that I care about. The best example of that is free will. And it's really just an example. But it's relatively easy to prove that mankind doesn't have free will. If you believe in science, if you believe every action has only one reaction, then the Big Bang is an action. And it causes reactions, which are actions, which cause reactions. We are traveling down a linear path. But if that's true, then nobody is accountable for their actions because we're traveling down a linear path. I had no choice. Neither did any criminals, anyone who's done anything awful ever. They're not accountable because they had no choice. So you shouldn't believe in that. You shouldn't act upon it, even if you can't disprove it. It would be ridiculous to act as though no one is at fault for anything. Tear things apart, so we ignore it, which is good. Of course, before I go into a similar discussion about Plato and Descartes, it's important to examine who they are first. With Plato, I took special note that he led a relatively sad life. He saw the city-state that he was brought up to love reformed and reformed and reformed on a mass scale 3 times in 3 years. And then, a few years later, he got taken in by one of the philosophical legends of the entire history of the planet, Socrates. And then Socrates dies. It's not a happy thing for him, I imagine. If it were, I don't think he would have written the apology. Descartes' a different thing. He doesn't grow up sad. He grows up rich, but sick. He grows up moments after he's born. His mother dies. The family's first child didn't really make it, and Descartes was not a healthy child. He wasn't a healthy man. He died of pneumonia in Sweden. That's where it ended for him. And when he was a boy going to school, he had a different wake-up time than the rest of the kids because it was just assumed for him that he needed more bed rest. Plato and Descartes came up with similar ideas, though. the allegory of the cave and ergo cogito sum both transmit the same idea. The only thing in reality that's real is you. The only thing that you can prove is real is you, anyway. The rest of it could be some illusion. For Plato, maybe you are an illusion too. Maybe you're just a shadow. Probably not, though. It's not quite how the allegory reads. They also had ideas on happiness. Plato, it's not so much happiness, it's fulfillment. It's leading a good life. That requires reason. Reason over empathy and sympathy, emotion and ethics. Okay. For Descartes, it's progress. Here's the thing about both of those. If you really believe in the allegory of the cave, is the reasonable thing to do to try to escape? If you're locked in a cell with a bunch of other people, is the reasonable thing to do try to escape? Because it seems to me, for the allegory of the cave, you escape and it's just another cave. If we're talking about the allegory in the proven sense, where it's, humans have limited senses, we can only detect so many dimensions, we can only perceive so much of reality, then each time we escape the cave, there's just another layer of it. So why isn't it reasonable to try to escape? To educate ourselves? Wouldn't it be more reasonable to make the most of what we have, to be productive well within the cave, well within the cage? The reasonable thing for Plato to do isn't to just keep thinking, it would have been to act, to take a utilitarian approach, try to do the most good for the most people. But that's not what Plato does. He keeps thinking and he keeps writing and he adds to society, but I'm not sure it's arguable that he does a whole lot of good unless you define reason as good, but it's reasonable to help more people because that's bringing more happiness to the world, more fulfillment. So to argue that what Plato does is good, you would probably have to define reason as just writing down what you think. But if everyone did that, then everyone would die and none of us would escape the cave. Descartes finds himself in a similar position. Descartes' belief for happiness, like I said, is progress. But if the only thing that exists is you, can't prove the past, can't prove the future, you can only prove yourself in this moment, you can't progress. Because any goals you set weren't really set by you, they were set by an improvable version of you in the past, possibly an illusion. So are you really chasing your goals, or are you chasing goals set out for you by an illusion? That's the trouble. Modern psychology and another thinker named Alan Watts both also have thoughts on this. I plan to use quotes from an audio lecture by Watts, but modern psychology pins it down pretty well. What it comes down to in studies recently is that looking inwards too much can lead you down some bad paths. It can lead to depression. They do call a difference between brooding and self-reflection, but one can pretty easily transform into the other. Depression is not reasonable. It's a dark and horrible thing. Alan Watts says that if you spend too much time looking inward, then inward becomes the only thing that you can think about. That's not an exact quote, but it gets to the idea of what he's saying. That's what I intend to present in my paper. That even though you can absolutely prove Plato's idea, and even though you absolutely cannot disprove Descartes', you shouldn't believe in either of them. Because even according to the people who wrote them, they won't bring you happiness. According to modern psychology, they won't bring you happiness. According to other thinkers, they won't bring you happiness. They won't bring you fulfillment. They won't do anything for you. Maybe they'll make you feel smart. But as it comes out, that's about it. And that's not worth it. Thanks for your time. This has been Corey Hood. Au revoir.